It's time for another episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, digging into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my special guest is JD King, and we're going to be talking about his brand new book, Mighty Like Gideon, Revived and Battle Ready at Your River of Testing. JD, we've been following each other around for years, so I feel like this conversation has been a long time in the making. Welcome to the show, man.
Oh, thank you so much, Shaun. It's an honor to be here.
And I know in like the circles that you and I run in, like people know who you are, but hey, I serve more than just a charismatic audience. So I'd love to kick us off by having you share a bit of the JD King origin story, superpowers, special abilities, secrets you've never told anybody in your family, a few things that'll help us get to know you.
Thanks. I have so many great experiences. I found out not too long ago that I have a relative who was converted by John Wesley in London, and he actually moved here to be one of the first Methodists. So I descend from this great heritage of revivalists. My grandfather was involved with the healing revivals of the 40s and 50s. So there's all these great experiences, these things I heard as a kid, these legends, and this dream of someday maybe I could be involved with something that would touch people's lives and people would be stirred up. And so I've been on a journey to want to be a revivalist and maybe to stir people's hearts toward God, to get it, to get something deep in their souls. I'd like to think something I'm doing is going to cause people to really love Jesus more and, I don't know, make a difference in the world. And I mean, there's so many other things I could say, but that's kind of my origin story. It feels like God said, you're from a heritage of revivalists. It's time to step into your shoes and stir some people up, get them, passionate about Jesus, wanting to change the world.
Well, thank you for helping us get to know you a little better. Next, I'd love to get into what we refer to as the story behind the book. Like what was the catalyst for this idea? Where did it get started? Is there a particular concern or problem in the church or culture? Like how did it start? What are you trying to respond to with this message?
Well, as you already know, I co-wrote this book with Steve Gray. He was the leader, the father of what was called the Smithton Outpouring, a revival that broke open in rural Missouri in 1996. And he did a sermon in 1997 or so called the River Test, and it was taking the Gideon story and basically saying that here are all these guys standing along the edge of the river, and it's kind of like this idea the river is a metaphor for God, for the encounter, for the glory, something, beautiful, magnificent. And the idea is like, how are you going to respond to this river? What are you going to do? Maybe there's an opportunity to drink deeply from the things of God and purposes and what's your attitude going to be? Obviously in the story, as you well know, some of the guys really drank one way and some of them seem to not have as much concern. Anyway, it was this great story and a lot of people were really moved by the sermon. And, I'd been thinking about it a lot of years, and some people were talking to Steve Gray and I about sharing some of our stories of what we saw in the revival and maybe some life lessons, principles. And I remembered that story, and I thought it was a useful tool to draw on the Gideon story and using these different episodes from Gideon's life to talk about, us getting close to God. How are we going to respond to the river? How are we thirsty? Do we want something more? What might it look like to actually, go to the deep place with God? And so this book is kind of our shared, he's a baby boomer generation. I'm a Gen X, two different generations, two different, points of view, but we're both kind of calling people to thirst and using the Gideon story as a basis for that.
And in terms of like the average believer today, is there something about Gideon's story that makes him particularly relatable? There are those characters in the Bible.
Right.
We struggle, but I feel like Gideon's somebody we could all kind of relate to.
Well, the way I've been talking about the book, it sounds like it's a crazy charismatic book, but I think there's a lot of elements in this that would apply to an evangelical. I mean, and many others. I mean, I think even maybe a non-believer might even get some value out of it on some respects. But like Gideon, there's so many aspects of his life. In fact, I would say there's several chapters or episodes of his life that are very useful. And I think one of the ones I love the most is this idea, Gideon was in the wine press, like this low place, this struggle, here the Midianites are, taking their food, destroying their lives. not much hope. But Gideon somehow found a way to begin to thresh wheat in the wine press. And really, I think the big application in that story is that God showed up for Gideon in his lowest point, at this tough moment. And I think sometimes we imagine that God's going to meet us on the mountaintop, this, place of, success and beauty and wonder and all that. But I think most of the time we actually find that God meets us in the low place when it's really hard, when it's difficult. And Gideon was that, he had to accept, God saying, "Hey, you're a mighty warrior." And he's like looking up, laughing, like, "What do you mean a mighty warrior? I'm barely able to feed my family. How could you say that about me?" And there's something, I mean, fundamentally in this book is a little bit of a message of, are you going to rise up into your destiny? Are you going to become the kind of person that you could be to change the world? And it's going to require some choices. It's going to require, some openness. It's going to require maybe a confidence that God, in fact, has something bigger in store for you.
And JD, you and I, a little bit before the interview, talked briefly about the Smithton outpouring. I'd love to give you like the 10,000 foot flyover of how that got started, what God did there, and then talk to us a little bit about how it impacted you personally and how it's part of the message of the book.
Yeah, definitely the Smithton story is baked all the way through the book. I mean, even though the book is kind of presenting the Gideon side, the Gideon side is a bit more of the husk, if you will. I mean, fundamentally, it's kind of Steve Gray and I telling our stories, what we've observed. I mean, there's some neat stories in here we've never shared before. But the Smithton story is basically a town of 532 people in rural Missouri, 80 miles east of Kansas City. It's a town with no gas station, no store. It's a little rural, country town, and there's this little church there, and Steve Gray was pastoring at the time, and it'd really been dry and hurting, and God broke open in a special way, and it's crazy. I mean, I was there, I was a part of all this, and people began to come from all over the world to this place in the middle of nowhere. You had people from Korea and people from Germany, and people would line up on like Friday afternoons at 3 o'clock just to make sure they got in the door. And so there'd be like 300 people lined up just going down the road, just crazy. And this building would be packed wall to wall, like literally. I mean, if you're really worshiping, you'd almost elbow somebody in the face. But just this, I was there for all this, and it's kind of hard to describe these moments because, there's hype and there's manipulation, but then there's just really when God shows up in his own way, and it's not anything a human being could ever orchestrate or manipulate. And it just changes your life. You see people just absolutely weeping, people crying out, people getting desperately hungry for God, watching darkness and heaviness knock off their lives, and I mean, just a beautiful thing. People falling deeply in love with Jesus. I mean, those experiences have shaped me forever. And I certainly am interested in a lot of other things, but there's a part of me that keeps going back to those moments. And I think everybody deserves a chance to experience something of that in their lifetime.
And we'll just take a weird left turn because this thought came into my head. I think another revival kind of outpouring people can think of in recent history is what we saw at Asbury not too long ago. Obviously, you being a part of a large outpouring like you were, why do you think God moves like this in like sometimes we see God show up again at places where great revivals and outpourings happened in the past, and all of a sudden it flares up there again. But just God showing up, the Spirit moving in like these pockets and weird, small, desolate places. What's that about?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm going to mention this, Shaun. I actually talk a little bit about Asbury in the book. So there's a little section on Asbury. I think it's wonderful. I mean, there's a lot of lessons from Asbury. I mean, obviously that college has had a number of revivals over the years. I think they have a little bit of a culture that says, hey, we would like to see God show up in a great way, which is certainly something to celebrate. Now, when I wrote in the book, though, I had a chance to talk with some of the young people who had been in the revival, and I met a couple of older leaders who were in it. And in the book, I kind of contrast the response. I mean, some of the older leaders were criticizing the, what they called amateur hour, or the maybe the lack of professional musicians, or maybe they felt like the preachers were not that slick. And there was one guy I was talking to who was really running his mouth about all this. And it's interesting, his perspective. He was older, probably a boomer. His attitude was, revival should be an event, something professional, something I guess that appealed to him. And the young people had the different attitude. They were tired of production, tired of slick. They wanted something raw and authentic. And I think I read in Christianity Today, the leader of Asbury was talking to the students, and he said, like, what more should we add? And they were like, no, you should take away more. Like, but the point in the book I was talking about is, I think sometimes we have ideas on how God's supposed to work, what God's supposed to do, and we've built it from our experiences or our preferences or whatever. But God might need to be moving in a way that's different than what we might expect, because the younger kids, they don't want smoke and lights and slick, well put together people. They'd like somebody that's just raw and real and maybe even less refined. And to them, they would say that must really be God now. I believe that's God. And so I think Asbury is an example of that. I mean, God was using raw, young students, using less refined. They were going towards simplicity, honesty. I think the Asbury revival is a foreshadowing of things that are getting ready to come all through our nation. I believe we're on the eve of great revival, and I think we need to perk up our ears. In fact, Shaun, in the book, one of the things I talk about, one of the chapters is, "Are you ready?" And Gideon, if you read the story, this angel of the Lord shows up to Gideon when he's in the wine press, and he doesn't even recognize it's an angel. Like, he's saying all these dumb things and all, and we got to realize we might not see God, might already be at work in some special ways in our world right now. And the question is, are we paying attention to that and having an openness to it?
Well, I think in the context of being like a charismatic prophetic culture, we're not sure which prophetic word to try to keep up with because there's so many that are being released
Right,
every
right.
day. But I remember, not too many years ago, we were getting a lot of prophetic words about God moving through people who you don't know, you've never
Right.
heard of, you've never seen. They seem
Yeah.
inconsequential because they are so not on the world stage, and yet
Mhm.
he's going to move through small and unlikely people. And I think what you just described with Asbury is a foreshadowing of definitely
Yeah.
how God, not that God isn't going to work with big names you've heard of, but where God's moving right now, it's just maybe different than we've expected, different than how we've learned to do church.
Right.
And so like I feel like Asbury maybe gives us an opportunity and other outpourings like this to unlearn some of the things we
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
we think about how we do it. And God moves only if we check these boxes and A, B, C,
Mhm.
D. Definitely need to be open to God moving how he wants to move, not how we
Right.
think he should move. I think the place I'd love to go next, one of the things you talk about in the book is how what we thirst for determines our destiny. Obviously, in the
Right.
story
Right.
of Gideon, they're literally drinking water, but on a practical level, day to day for the average Christian, like what does it look like to thirst for something and satiate that thirst in a way that's going to impact our destiny and where we're
Yeah.
going?
Great question. And fundamentally, that's the core question and concern of the book. I probably didn't answer it adequately for you earlier, but the, you know, how thirsty are you? How, do you really want this? And, I don't know. I think we turn religion a lot into, well, we do behavioralism, moralism, all these other things. And don't get me wrong, we certainly could use some more morals, and it wouldn't hurt you to be a little nicer to people, but fundamentally, the Christian faith is not about a behavioralism and moralism. It's a heart matter. It's something about what drives your life. And the Bible talks about hunger and thirsting after righteousness. I started talking about this, and in fact, I did a sermon here, church, not too long ago, on Colossians chapter 3. I think verse 2 says something in line of, "Turn your affections, toward heaven." That's my paraphrase. And of course, the question people said to me, "Well, what does that mean?" I'm thinking, well, do you really need explained, the idea of turning your affections? I mean, don't get me wrong. If you love pizza, you love a certain kind of pizza. You're a big Chicago pan pizza person or whatever, deep dish pizza. I mean, nobody has to tell you to love that. I mean, every time you go to Chicago, you're going to get that. I mean, I know for you, you don't have to be told, I need to go find coffee when I'm on a flight. I mean, you love that. You're going to go find that.
It's already second nature.
It's already second nature for you. I mean, the stuff you really love. I mean, I'm from Kansas City. I'm a Kansas City Chiefs fan. I know most people listening to this will probably not like that, but I mean, in our town, people don't have a hard time liking the Chiefs. Yeah, I don't think. I mean, I think people love. They know how to love what they love. The problem is, I think sometimes we don't love God maybe to the level we think we do. We just don't. And I mean, and it's not me trying to criticize somebody watching this or whatever. It's just making an honest statement about, where do we really live? And, faith and all this should be more about what you do or what you know. It should be about what moves your heart. And, I get it. You can't love what you don't love, but, I do believe like, the hope of this book is that maybe they would spark some hunger, spark some passion, that, I don't know. I mean, like sometimes I'm not interested in something and I get a little taste of it or I watch something of it. And I'm like, oh, I love that. I mean, I remember for years, everybody was trying to get me to eat sushi, Sean. And it's like, eat this raw fish. I'm like, I'm not going to eat this raw fish. But I finally ate some raw fish. I had some salmon, I had some shrimp, and man, it was good. I liked it. Got a little taste of it. I started getting hungry. So if you and I were going to go out to lunch, Sean, I would actually probably prefer to order sushi over anything else because I got a taste of it, got a hunger for it, got a desire because I was around it. And, so I mean, fundamentally the story of Gideon is, are you getting hungry for God at the riverside? Do you want that? Somebody listen to me, I may not be able to stir this, but some things are better caught than taught. And I believe we've got to get a hunger for God, a thirst. It could change the world.
And it's funny. I read through your press kit this morning, and one of the questions made me think of like a conversation I literally had with one of my project managers yesterday, talking about how do we discern, is something in we're encountering, is it just an obstacle, or is this like a test from God? Because we've all heard stories of people saying, well, God told me to do this and it fell completely flat. And then they're wrestling with, well, was this really a test of obedience, or like, did I not hear the Lord? Like, it's a really, it's a really big wrestle. And so one of the themes in the book, you talk about testing, a rule of testing and spiritual growth. How do we discern, like, is this a test from God, or is this just an obstacle that you encounter in this broken world as part of life?
What a question, right? I mean, well, one of the ideas in the book, as you might get, is the men that stood on the side of the river at that time, most of them got sifted. They didn't respond, you might say, favorably unto God. And I think sometimes we go through life situations. Are we going to be positioned to for battle, to triumph, to be who we need to be, or are we going to allow ourselves to be sifted? And I don't always have all the answers. I mean, certainly God will allow challenges to come in our lives, and certainly God, I think, does want to test our faith and cause us to grow in things. And I believe that. But whether we're sure it's God or not God, I think we still have to respond to what the Lord has showed us, what the scriptures are saying. We've got to press in. If something is true, it should be able to survive the test. And in the book, I talk a little bit about how Gideon didn't always know, like he had to lay out the fleece. The famous story of laying that wool on the ground, and he wasn't 100% sure what the Lord wanted. And I think it's okay to ask questions. It's okay to have to pivot a little bit. It's okay to have to move forward a little bit, under the cover of darkness. He was called to tear down his father's pagan altar. He was a little bit reluctant to do that, because obviously messing with your family religion's not always a good idea. And he didn't do it the best. He did it under dark. He did it, nervously, but he did it just the same. He found a way to put one step in front of the other. And I think we're on a journey to just take some, we may not know all the next steps, but can we find one more step, and to ask the questions, to pivot, to learn from people, to pray, and to trust God, most of all, to give us the nudging and leading that we need to move forward.
And I'm going to Frankenstein one of the interview questions from the press kit.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Go a slightly different direction. So, in terms, these revivals, like, people are attracted to them. They drive long distances to go be a part of it, to get a touch from God. It's a little bit different than kind of all of our conferences, and I feel like people are drawn for different reasons. But for the person who's just feeling like spiritually dry right now, there isn't a conference next door. There isn't a revival breaking out down the street. How can they get filled up, get connected to God right where they are? Like, it's great if you have access to these other things where God is moving, but that's not practical for everyone. God, while God is always moving, he's maybe not moving in a big way just down the street right now. How do we just get connected in right where we are?
Well, that's a great question, and I don't know. I think sometimes all these events and conferences and things can kind of become a distraction. I mean, the real things of God are just not about, excitement and energy and great singing. And I mean, I'm not against any of those things. Heavens knows it's fun to go to a big event and to enjoy them. I've gone to many myself. I've hosted some, but there's a lot of, I think, answers to that. I mean, I think for one thing, I've always enjoyed drawing on the old stories. Like, in this book here, I tell some of the old revival stories. What happened to Charles Finney when he prayed? What happened to these other men and women of God who had an experience with God and they share their story. You read something of their heart. I think history is a opportunity. Like, I know not everybody responds positively to history, but I love to read the old revival accounts, to read, and some of that's baked into this book, some of the old stories. But when I read about what somebody else walked through, it's like I can kind of see myself in that same situation. And I think it's good to get friends. I mean, get some people in your life who walk in the things of God, that have a hunger, and just have some conversations. Buy their lunch, talk to them, ask them questions. I mean, this is kind of old fashioned, but we need to get back to it. I mean, read some Bible. Whether you're feeling it or not. Say, hey, I'm going to read. I'm going to read a chapter today, and I'm just going to let it set on my heart. I'm going to find some great worship. Don't just listen to the same song you have for the last 10 years. I mean, find something new. I mean, get around some people that carry some passion and heart, and might watch one of their YouTube videos, and just to pray. I mean, this sounds strange, but yeah, I think we make prayer a bit too much like we're always asking God for things. What about praying just to know God or enjoy Him, to commune with Him? And sometimes I just pray and I just sit and think about Him, His nature, His character, His beauty, and I don't ask for anything. I just try to know Him. And there's a whole lot that goes into that. Obviously, part of your answer I would like to say is, hey, they should buy Mighty Like Gideon, the book here. Maybe it'll spark something fresh in their heart or whatever. But, I mean, that would be my dream, that people would read this book and actually get more of a heart for the Lord and really want to press in. But yeah, that's kind of a ridiculous. I mean, that's really not the answer. But, I believe God can do all these things. He could use these moments, use people. But, I think God's doing more in and around us than we think. We just need to maybe turn our attention a little more toward that and just create space and time.
And you kind of already alluded to this, but I'm going to answer or ask the question anyways. In terms of kind of the reader's journey with the book, like every single person who encounters this message, like, what's that thread? What's that one thing that's like everybody needs to take away? If everybody takes away this one thing, we were successful with this project.
Well, I think it gets back to what we've already been talking about, that thirst, that thirsting for God. I mean, either you have it or you don't. And I'm not here to criticize the people that don't, but I think some people that don't have that thirst, they want to have it, they want to, but, it's not always being the perfect person. It's not always having the perfect scorecard. I mean, I think we all deal with problems and pain and foolishness and all of that, but there's something about a deep yearning for God, to thirst after Him, to say, I want you, Jesus. I want you desperately and powerfully. I want you to move in my life. And, I'm going to try to open my life up to that. And, I think the Gideon story is a lot of things, but I think on some level it's both Gideon and these men that walked with him. They crossed the threshold on that. And, Gideon and his men, they triumphed in a very difficult time. They didn't have many resources, had the enemy breathing down their neck. I think it describes in the Bible, like they came in and they couldn't even count all the camels the Midianites were riding in on. And they were burning up their crops and tearing up everything. Felt like everything was against them. But God caused a few ordinary people to rediscover what it really means to walk with Him. They got a thirst for Him, and they rose up in victory, and they fought unconventional warfare. I mean, I do think God's calling us to fight, but not necessarily with swords and clubs. They fought with sounds, with light and glory, and mainly they fought with just faith and confidence that God, in fact, had called them to rise up out of the winepress to change the world. And I truly believe, Shaun, that your listeners and others are part of the people being called out of the winepress. You don't have to have everything all together. You don't have to be the smartest person. You might be, I'm telling you, you're a mighty warrior and you go, I barely even survived last week, but I do believe it's possible. that we're living in a day where God is calling people to rise up and become something fantastic.
Well, I think too, just to add on to that, like there's a difference between chasing and pursuit. Like we all want to touch, we all want to be filled up, we all want to be close to God. But I think we can get in this place where we're chasing conferences, we're chasing revivals, we're chasing momentary encounters and experiences
Right.
versus like a real hardcore pursuit of God. Chasing is just running after something.
Sure.
Pursuit is slow, intentional, methodical. It's not always exciting. There are
Mhm.
days where you feel like nothing is accomplished. And if there's anything I've learned, and I've interviewed well over 1,000 guests on the different podcasts
Right.
through the years, and just like you, I work in publishing and get to meet lots of interesting leaders. And when you talk to men and women who, we put them on a pedestal because we see them on a stage and we're impacted by their messages. When you have quiet conversations with them and ask them about how did you get to this place where you get to steward what I definitely see you carrying, the majority of them give you really boring answers. And they're like, well, it's hundreds of hours in my prayer closet. It's reading through the Bible this many times in a year. It's this constant pursuit of God. And it actually takes
Right.
intentionality. It takes time. Like if you ask them for their secret, that is their secret. And
Mhm.
it's not
Right.
always as simple as, well, sometimes God moves in a dramatic way and there's a touch at an event or at a revival, whatever it might be, and somebody's changed forever in a moment. And that's amazing and that's wonderful. But often the normal Christian life is a slow, intentional walk in a direction over many decades. And so
Yeah.
I preach as much to myself as I say that to those looking for that kind of a touch. Go after that slow pursuit, and you're going to find what you're looking for probably faster than chasing 100 conferences.
Well said. I agree with you 100%. You know, you're talking about, maybe the mundane. I mean, God's been talking to me a lot about that over the last few years. And in fact, this book project's an interesting thing because I used to travel a little bit itinerantly and kind of would do meetings. I like to pray for the sick and felt, there was a season where I had a measure of success with some of that. And then I kind of hit some tough times. My daughter got sick. I went through just a number of things. And I was almost a little mad at God, to be honest with you. And I hate to admit that, because that was a wrong attitude to have, but I was. And the Lord said, you love me in the heights, but could you discover me in the deep places or the low places? And this book here is a little bit of a symbol of God says, you know what? If you trust in me and you can be patient, I will, if you'd asked me like 8 years ago, hey, are you going to ever have a book published through Chosen Books? I'd be like, oh, that'll never happen. But here it is, like God said, okay, you're learning what it means to be in those mundane moments, the hard moments. There's something to be said about humility and sacrifice and, going the long row. And, I've been, I was just up out in California a few weeks ago and I got to be around Randy Clark and Bill Johnson, who, are two of the leading charismatic leaders. And I've kind of got to know them a little bit over the years. And let me tell you what impresses me about those guys the most is they are actually very humble, gracious people. They make a lot of time for people. They are very open to others. They're very, very humble people. Many of the greats I've been around, the ones that really are making a difference in the world, are people that have been battle tested, who have walked through some things, and they're actually very gracious and they're not competitive. They're not trying to prove anything to anyone. They're just simply trying to love Jesus and share the things. And I don't know if I've arrived at that spot quite yet, Shaun, but I want to be that. Like when I grow up, I want to be this humble, gracious person that has time for others and is, I'm not competing with anybody else to prove anything, but just wanting to be a vessel for who Jesus is. I think that's really the answer. It's the long run. It's not becoming very powerful for a year and being on the magazine cover or whatever. It's the long run and how you treat your family and what you really do to walk this out. That's what makes a difference.
But I think that that kind of flash in the pan overnight success journey, a lot of us aren't ready to shoulder that, to steward that, because we haven't developed the maturity over that longer, more intentional moving in a direction. And so sometimes fame and notoriety is thrust upon someone and it's really hard and they have to learn to deal with that. I've two more often than not, when you get the magazine covers and the stages before you're ready, it destroys people. It
Yes.
ruins their whole life. And so the long, methodical move of pursuit of God in a direction is the more viable long-term path. As a guy who's gotten to work with Bill and Randy on many projects over the past 11 plus years, they are two of the most humble guys I've ever met. And like, for me, my mark of a leader that I'm really excited about is, are you the same guy that I see you to be on a stage, behind the scenes in business meetings when I can do something for you? When we're at dinner, how do you treat people when we're out in public? Or if we encounter people who can do absolutely nothing from you, in fact, they want you to pray for them, they want whatever, and especially at times that it's inconvenient, how do they treat those people? And I can say Bill and Randy have excelled at every level of situation and circumstance I've been in with both of them. And to me, like you, I'm like, man, if I can get to a place where I want to be like Bill and Randy when I grow up too. And so
Yeah.
just to say, how you see them on the stage, that they're those same guys behind the scenes and in all kinds of different circumstances. And so it's just refreshing. And I think for, when you're part of a big ministry, people throw shade, people throw stones and whatever. But with all the drama that we see happening of leaders stepping down and problems right now throughout the church, just know that that's not every leader. There are
Right.
great leaders who pursue the Lord with everything they have and walk in great integrity. So, just know we can't just paint that whole brush and say all leaders are bad. There are good leaders out there doing great work. I'll get off my soapbox now. JD, in terms of people connecting with you, finding out more about your
Yeah.
ministry, this and all the other books you have, what are the best places for us to connect with you on the web?
Certainly. Well, I have jdking.net. That's kind of my author hub, and you can see some of my books and other things on there. And I have a blog that's on there. And if you're interested in this book, Mighty Like Gideon, revived and battle ready at your river of testing, we have a landing page. It's just mightylikegideon.com, and you can see a little bit more about the book and all. But yeah, it's great. I appreciate you letting me be on here with you and talk about these things. I think these things are important. I mean, that thirst matters. Not only whether you're thirsty, but even how you drink. I mean, how are you going to drink before the Lord? And it makes a real difference.
Yeah, definitely what we feed and what we think about definitely impacts what we pursue and what we become. It's time to bring this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation today with JD King. Once again, our book was Mighty Like Gideon, revived and battle ready at your river of testing. And once again, JD, I want to say thank you so much for sharing with us today. It's been an honor and pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you.